Hi class, how are you? So today we are starting our first chapter, and if I could share the screen, the first chapter talks about biomolecules and energy. And so before uh, it's my generally what I do that before going into a chapter, I'd like to give a brief concept, and then I really start into getting deeper into any topic. So let's go to the whiteboard. So this chapter is talks about biomolecules, right? So water biomolecules. So bio comes from the word biology, which means life. So this biomolecules would mean that molecules that support our life. Now, when you talk of life, you just don't consider only human beings, but you consider um, bacteria, plants, various forms of plants, and animals, um, and of course, human beings. So, so we are going to study about those molecules that support life. Now, in current context, why this chapter is important. So you all know that we are going through a very trying times because of this COVID-19. Now you must be hearing that there are hundreds of trials or attempt to develop vaccine against this virus. So why I'm linking biomolecules to COVID-19? The reason I'm linking is because these biomolecules, they're essentially proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, which are also called as fats, and nucleic acid. Nucleic acids, which could be DNA. These are the biomolecules, major form of biomolecules that supports molecules that support life. Now, again, going back to COVID-19, we know that COVID-19 is a virus. So anybody who wants to understand this virus, whether it is a scientist or a vaccine developer or WHO, they have to look into the composition of this virus. So, so this virus, could be uh, made up of uh, protein that surrounds uh, uh, its basic core structure, and and in the center is its nucleic acid. So even for understanding a virus such as COVID, we need to know the composition, and these compositions are essentially the biomolecules. So, for instance, uh, the outer layer. This outer layer, it is made up of lipids and proteins, lipids and proteins, and also some of the carbohydrate. Then you have the nucleic acids. So nucleic acid of COVID-19 is RNA, right? So without a greater knowledge of biomolecules, we may not be able to understand, develop therapeutics, understand its life cycle. So, so this chapter on biomolecules is very basic, but it has a very big implication to understand biology of bacteria, plants, animals, different kinds of plants, different kinds of animals. And there can be nothing as miraculous as development of human body from a single cell zygote. So let's go back to the first slide, biomolecules and chapter 1. So what are the learning objectives? The learning objectives are what are the forces that hold this biomolecule. But before really going into biomolecule, let's understand how molecules are formed, how molecules are formed from atoms, why there are different kinds of molecules. And one should also remember that 50 to 70% or 50 to 70% in any cell or any living being is composed of water. So water plays a very huge role in the maintenance of plants, human beings, bacteria. So we have to understand how water is important and how these atoms, they form molecules, and how these molecules, they take shape of biomolecules, what are their role. And lastly, the third, to understand the structure of DNA. So we all pass our characters from one generation to another generation. So we receive information from our parents in the shape of nucleic acid. So in our case, it is DNA. In case of COVID-19, it is RNA. In bacteria, it is DNA. So nucleic acids are very important for passing information from one generation to the next generation. So now before going into molecules, what I want to introduce you to, or maybe you perhaps know of this table that is called as periodic table. This periodic table is nothing but this periodic table is essentially arrangement of atoms in a table, in a shape of a table. Now, how this table gets the shape. So in any table, if you note, top to bottom is called as column, and left to right is called as rows. So for example, here, column number 1, column number 2, so on and so forth, and it goes from left to right side. So left top corner is the simplest atom, which is called as hydrogen. And then all the atoms in this column, they have very similar chemical and physical properties to hydrogen. So the physical and chemical properties of an atom changes across the rows, but across the column, it remains the same. So number 1, periodic table is nothing but systematic arrangement of atoms in a form of table. And the arrangement is based upon increasing atomic mass. I'll get into atomic mass later. So from left to right, there is an increase in reactivity. So the atoms on the left-hand side, they are the least reactive atoms. As you go from left to right, for example, hydrogen to carbon, nitrogen, C stands for carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, you increase the reactivity of an atom. So this is not really a chemistry class, so I don't want to get into the very intricacies of periodic table, but I want to just move on to explain to you the structure of an atom. So what is an atom? An atom is the smallest or fundamental particle element. Is the smallest. Although there are because of scientific discoveries, there are small particles known smaller than atom. But for this class, atom, let's consider atom as the smallest fundamental particle of an element. So what is an atom composed of? So an atom could be composed of a core particle or core particle, And this core particle is surrounded by just like universe. You can consider Earth as a center and or Sun as a center, and all these planets revolve around uh, or rotate around Sun. So a nucleus is the core particle of an atom, and around this nucleus revolves electrons. So, so an atom could be divided into basic two parts. One, the core nucleus, and nucleus is made up of protons, which are positive particles. And second thing that a nucleus is composed of is neutrons, and that is a neutrons, as the name suggests, it is a neutral entity. So I would name this as like okay, I would name this as neutral entity, neither positive nor negative. Now the around this nucleus revolves electrons. Now these electrons are very interesting, and these electrons are called as uh, these these uh, these uh, these electrons which revolves around the nucleus are negative particle. The charge is negative. So you can say that positive nucleus is a positively charged core particle, mainly because of protons, and electrons are negatively charged particles that moves around the nucleus. But what is interesting is that the collective charge on an atom is neutral. Why it is neutral? Because the electrons and protons, they balance each other. So the ultimate charge on an atom is neutral. Now I mentioned to you that in periodic table there is increase of atomic mass. So as we move from one atom to other, there is an increase in atomic mass. What is atomic mass? Atomic mass is electrons plus protons, electrons plus protons plus neutron is referred as atomic mass. There is another terminology which is very important. It is called as atomic number. This atomic number is just corresponds to the number of protons. So while atomic mass takes into consideration everything, electron, protons, and neutrons, atomic number only focuses on the number of protons. So let's go back again to the periodic table. So what you see here, for instance, let's consider an atom B. B stands for boron. The atomic number is 5, which means that it has 5 protons, right? And atomic mass is 10.8. So 5 protons, 5 electrons, when they combine together, and neutrons, when they combine together, the total mass is 10.8. So atom name is boron, the symbol is B. Their symbol means they're indicated by a single letter. Atomic number, which refers to protons, is 5, and the total is 10.8. Total means total atomic mass. Now I want you to focus on 4 atoms: hydrogen, C for carbon, N for nitrogen, O for oxygen, and last one, P for phosphorus. Now, why I'm asking you to focus is because these four atoms, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and P, phosphorus, they are the building blocks for majority of the biomolecules that we will study later. So these atoms are very important. How they form biomolecules? Because these atoms, they enter into alliances, and these alliances in chemical world is called as chemical bonding. So when two atoms they combine because of special forces, and they enter to form, two becomes one, then it is a molecule. An atom is by itself, but when it enters into alliance with another atom, it is called as molecule. For example, oxygen that we breathe. Oxygen that we breathe is made up of 2 oxygen atoms. 2 oxygen atoms. The oxygen that we breathe. Now, the oxygen we take inside our lungs, what we release is carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide is made up of one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms. So 1 carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms. So here, in oxygen molecule, oxygen gas, there are 2 similar oxygen atoms. So this is an homogeneous molecule. In carbon dioxide, there are 3 atoms, 1 carbon and 2 oxygen. So the total number of atoms in carbon dioxide is 3, but there are 2 different types of atoms. I hope you get my point. In a carbon dioxide molecule, there are total 3 atoms, but out of these 3 atoms, there are only 2 different atoms, 1 carbon and 1 oxygen. Okay, so atoms, they enter into alliances for stability, and these alliances are called as chemical bondings, and there are different kinds of chemical bondings. So one of the chemical bondings that we are going to study, or there are few chemical bondings that we are going to cover in this class, and these are essentially: number 1 is called as ionic bonding. Number 2 is called as covalent bonding. And number 3, hydrogen bonding. So 3 major bondings that we are going to discuss in this class. So let's look into ionic bonding first. So the example for ionic bonding is common salt that is present in our kitchen table, and this common salt is made up of 2 different atoms. One is called as sodium, and the other is chloride. So two different atoms. Salt is made up of sodium and chloride. And it is indicated, sodium is indicated by a symbol Na, and chloride is formed from an atom called as chlorine, which is represented by Cl. So this atom, salt, is a molecule that is essentially NaCl, sodium chloride. Now the question comes, how sodium chloride is formed. And sodium chloride is very important, not only for the purpose of taste or for eating, but sodium concentration is very important in our blood. So whenever we end up in emergency situation, or something happens to us, our blood is taken for biochemistry. And one of the indicators for a good health is presence of sodium and potassium ion, chloride ions, because they're very important for various physiological functions. So let's just go back to periodic table. So what I want you to focus on, so this is sodium Na, which is present on the first column. And if you see chlorine is present on the right hand side. So remember, I mentioned to you that atoms on the left hand corner or left hand column, they are weaker atoms in comparison to atoms which are present on the rightmost. So sodium and chlorine, they're present at extreme ends of column 3, of row 3. Row 3, sodium is the first atom and chlorine is on the rightmost side. So chlorine is stronger than sodium. Now, because chlorine is stronger than sodium, this ability of chlorine is called as electronegativity. So electronegativity means chlorine has the power to take one electron from sodium. Now, what is the rationale for chlorine taking one electron from sodium? Is because they want to enter into stability by forming a compound called as sodium chloride that we consume. So here, what happens that sodium loses one electron. Loses one electron. Because of that, because of this loss of electron, sodium becomes positively charged because it loses one electron. So I'll come into that. So it becomes positively charged. And chlorine gains one at one electron. Because of this, chlorine becomes negatively charged. So what happens? We know that negative and positive charge, they attract each other. This attraction is called as, when negative and positive charge, they attract each other, this attraction is called as electrostatic interactions. Electrostatic interaction is between positive and negative charge. Now here I want to explain that when an atom loses an electron or gains an electron, they are no more called as atoms, but they are referred as ions. So ions are those entities which are formed by either gain or loss of electron. So sodium loses one electron, so it becomes positively charged. Chlorine gains one electron, so it becomes positive charge. And these positive and negative Negatively charged ions, they attract each other and they enter into chemical bonding, and that is we get to eat or consume salt. So here what you see here, that so in this situation the example is different. So here, but the bottom line is that in ionic bond, one atom loses an electron, it becomes positively charged, and the atom that gains an electron becomes negatively charged. And because of that, they attract each other. And this is by the force called as electrostatic interaction. So an ionic bond is formed between two ions. These two ions are negatively charged and positively charged. The negative and positively charged ions emerge from loss or gain of electrons, and they attract each other, they come close to each other, and they form chemical bonding. And that's the story about sodium chloride. Now we move into the next bonding, which is called as covalent bonding. So here in this, we talked about ionic bonding. Now let's go to covalent bonding, the second bonding. So, so we are talking about the second bonding called as covalent bonding. And this, as compared to ionic bonding, which is made up by loss or gain of electrons, covalent bonding is mainly by sharing of electrons. So covalent bonding, sharing of electrons. So maximum of our biomolecules, proteins, carbohydrate, lipids, and nucleic acids, they are all made up of covalent bond, majority. And so covalent bond is very important for the stability of biomolecules. Okay, so let's take an example of covalent bond. Example of covalent bond could be, let's say, hydrogen gas, or let's say a glucose molecule. What is a glucose molecule? Glucose molecule is six atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen. So a covalent bond is formed by sharing of atoms. Sharing of electrons. Now I want to go into a very special molecule, and this special molecule is called as water. And water is the universal solvent. If water which is so water is made up of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. So 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. So what scientists thought that the structure of water would be linear. So hydrogen separated by oxygen and then separated by hydrogen, a linear molecule. So what are these few interesting qualities of water? Is that number one, it's a universal solvent, Second, 50 to 70 percent of our body or cell is composed of water, 70%. And third, what is very special quality of water is that it is neutral. It's a neutral entity. It's a neutral entity, which makes it as a great solvent as compared to anything acidic or basic. So I don't want to go into the detail. So scientists thought that the water has a linear structure. But when they did some experiment, they came to learn that indeed water is not linear, but water is an angular molecule. It's not linear, it is an angular molecule. And in this angular molecule, oxygen is here at the top, and this oxygen is separated by the two hydrogen atoms, which is at an angle. Now, since if you go back to the periodic table, oxygen is a stronger atom than hydrogen. So oxygen becomes slightly negative. Oxygen becomes slightly negative, and because of that, hydrogens, they become partially positive. So this is the chemical character of water. And because of this, they become an excellent solvent. So, but here, don't get confused. Most students, they get confused. They think that because there is separation of charge into negative and positive, so it's an ionic molecule. It is not an ionic molecule. It's a covalent molecule. Okay. So what did we discuss until now? We talked about atom structure. We talked about periodic table, atomic number, atomic mass. We talked about ionic bond, covalent bond, and then we spoke about water. So now let's see what's ahead. So now because of this special characters, water can form matrices. So one water can combine with other water can bond with other water, so they can form a matrix system. So that's very unique of water. So now let's go into about a biomolecule called as lipids. So lipids, they are also called as fats, and they are the most important for membrane function and formation. What is the function of membrane? Membrane acts as a boundary to protect us from various invasion from bacteria, virus. So one of the unique thing about COVID-19 is that it has a very unique lipid structure. Now, because of this, now I'm connecting it to a very general knowledge that we are facing. Now, lipid is what? Let's say butter, fat, and the butter is very greasy. But when you wash your hand with a detergent or soap, that lipid washes away. So this COVID-19 is also composed. So lipid plays a very important role in the membrane structure of this virus. So if you wash your hand with the detergent, it can degrade the virus. So that's why washing of hands is strongly advocated for preventing exposure to COVID-19. So fats, lipids, they are most important for formation of membrane and membrane serves as a boundary to protect us from invasion. Okay. So what you see in this slide is that this is a lipid molecule which forms a cell membrane. So let's go to the next. So what is carbohydrate? Carbohydrate serves as a carbohydrate serves as a carbohydrate. It serves as a excellent source of energy. Right? For example, when we get up in the morning, we feel hungry, we feel a little bit off, but as soon as we have our breakfast, we feel very much back into action and we can have our productive day. So carbohydrate is an excellent source of energy, and the building block for carbohydrate is glucose. And so that's the function of carbohydrate. Now let's go to next biomolecule. The next biomolecule is proteins. Proteins are macromolecules which are composed of amino acid. So I'll come back to this composition knowledge later, but proteins are very important part of our supporting our body. And why? Because number one, so proteins they provide infrastructure uh, to to our cells. Second, they help in defense mechanism by working as antibodies. These days, you must be hearing a lot of about presence of antibodies to COVID-19. So these antibodies are proteinaceous in nature. And also some of the proteins, I'll come back when I teach to you mitosis and meiosis, that microtubules, they are a form of proteins. Also, hormones and enzymes, they are biocatalysts. They help in doing metabolic activity, they help in growth, hormones. So proteins are a very important part. So let's revise. So lipids, carbohydrate, and proteins. So the building blocks for a protein is amino acids. The building block for carbohydrate is our glucose. And the building block for lipids is fatty acids, right? But out of these, lipids are most diverse and complex molecule. So what are biomolecules? Biomolecules are macromolecules, and they are individually made up of smaller units that is called as monomers. So what are biomolecules? They are essentially macromolecules, and macromolecules, they are made up of fundamental units they could be referred as monomer. So a macromolecule could be referred as polymers and a fundamental unit as monomer. So in case of lipids, it is fatty acid and glycerol. In case of carbohydrate, glucose, and in case of proteins, it is amino acid. Okay. So now we move on to the last biomolecule, which are called as nucleic acid. Nucleic acids are important for inheritance. What do I mean by inheritance? Means for passing genetic information from one generation next generation. So nucleic acid could be of two types. One is deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid, which is referred as DNA, and ribonucleic acid, that is referred as RNA. Majority of the living organisms, they have their genetic material as DNA, but there are some particles such as viruses. And which viruses? Such as HIV. HIV that causes AIDS it has genetic material as RNA. Also COVID-19 has genetic material as RNA. So majority of the genetic material is DNA, but in some instances, particularly in virus, I'm not calling a virus as an organism because if it is outside the cell, it doesn't exist. It's only it only replicates when it is inside the cell. So there are some viruses which have RNA as genetic material. So so both of these are nucleic acids. Nucleic acid, and nucleic acid is a macromolecule, and the monomer is a nucleotide. Now, what is this nucleotide made up of? So, nucleotide is composed of a sugar, phosphate, and nitrogenous bases. Now, sugar is mainly ribose. Phosphate is generally PO4. This gives a negative charge. Phosphate gives a negative charge to both DNA and RNA. So what is the charge of DNA and RNA? Negative, and that negative comes from phosphate molecule. And the nitrogenous bases could be of two types. Number one, purines, which are adenine, and guanine. And second, pyrimidines, that is cytosine and thymine. So there are two kinds of nitrogenous bases, purines and pyrimidines. So now, what is the context of these information in context of RNA and DNA? So let's look deeper. So let's compare. Let's make two charts. A chart comparative chart to compare between DNA and RNA. So a DNA, so both has ribose sugar, but the ribose sugar in DNA is deoxy. Why deoxy? Because this has less oxygen atom. Deoxy means without oxygen, whereas the ribose sugar in RNA is simple. What are ribose sugar? Ribose sugar is made up of 5 carbon. I'll come back to this, 5 carbon atoms. I mentioned to you that both DNA and RNA, they have phosphate, and this phosphate grants negativity to negatively charged. So the charge on DNA and both RNA is same, negative. Right, so both have negative. Now nitrogenous bases I write as B, NB. In DNA, nitrogenous bases are adenine, guanine as purine, and cytosine and thymine as pyrimidine. Now, same nitrogenous bases in RNA, the purines are adenine and guanine, and pyrimidines are cytosine and uracil. So let's recapitulate. Ribose is deoxy in DNA. In ribose, it is normal. I'll come back. Phosphate is same, negative charge, but in nitrogenous bases, DNA has adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, whereas in RNA, adenine and guanine as purine, and cytosine and uracil. So this is some of the major differences between DNA and RNA. Now let's look at the structure. Now so DNA is a double helical molecule, which was discovered by Watson and Crick. So it looks something, I'm sure you know the structure there, but this is like DNA structure. This is one strand, and the second strand would be like this. They are intertwined. Now when they're intertwined, this is called as the backbone of DNA or RNA. What is this backbone made up of? This backbone is made up of sugar and phosphate. And they are connected by a bond called as phosphodiester bond. I'll come back to the slide. Now, these are two single-stranded ladder, but how they are connected. So it turns out that they're connected by nitrogenous bases, where A forms double bond with T, and G, which is guanine, it forms triple. G forms triple bond with cytosine. In case of RNA, where there is no thymine, adenine forms double bond with uracil. So I gave you a lot of information. Now let's go back and revise with the slide. So remember, this is This is the ribose sugar. Ribose sugar has, as I mentioned, 5 carbon atoms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I would like to focus on carbon number 2. The carbon number 2 has 1 oxygen and 1 hydrogen in ribose. Ribose is for RNA. Now let's look at deoxyribose. In deoxyribose, second carbon atom has only hydrogen, there is no oxygen. So that's why it is called as deoxyribose. Right? So this is the backbone structure of DNA. So you focus, it is made up of phosphate and sugar. And what is the sugar in DNA? It is deoxyribose, and in RNA it is ribose. And these are the nitrogenous bases. Purines, adenine and guanine. Pyrimidines are cytosine and thymine. This is in DNA, and in RNA, thymine is replaced by uracil. And then you see that cytosine forms triple hydrogen bond, 1, 2, 3 with guanine, and adenine forms 2 hydrogen bonds with thymine. So this is how a double helical DNA looks like. These ladders, these steps, they are the nitrogenous bases. Now, as I mentioned to you, this is one of the last slide, that carbohydrate is one of the richest source of energy. 1 molecule of glucose, they give rise to 36 ATP. Some books will say 38, but for this class, which doesn't go good deep into chemistry or metabolism, we will take it as 36 ATP. Okay, so let's do some quick revision. And we'll be done with this chapter. So what did we discuss? We discussed about atoms. We talked about molecules. We talked about atomic masses, atomic mass, atomic number, how these atoms, they enter into bonding, such as ionic bonding, then covalent bonding, and then we talked about the structure of water. After doing this, we, of course, we talked about periodic table, then we went into biomolecules. So we talked very elementary lipids, then we talked about carbs, then we talked about proteins, amino acids, and then we talked about nucleic acids. And we finished that 1 glucose molecule can give rise to 36 ATPs. Now, what is ATP? ATP is the currency for energy, adenosine triphosphate. So the largest source of energy is lipids, but lipids are stored in our body. They are only used or mostly used when we starve. For an immediate currency, glucose is metabolized, that give rise to, but you know, some people get confused which one is better source of energy. So precisely it is lipids, but an immediate source of energy is carbohydrate. So with this, we finish this chapter. And so I will put this recording on the blackboard.